Hello, I'm Jeff Colton, and I'll be breaking down some of the key points of an article titled Who Needs Budgets by Jeremy Hope and Robin Fraser. According to Hope and Fraser, budgets as we know them ought to be abolished. Not only does budgeting absorb up to 30% of management's time, but using incentives that are too closely tied to a budget can cause improper selling or recording practices as employees try to make the numbers near the end of a fiscal period. Companies, or more specifically their employees, can sometimes feel like they're gripped in a budgetary vice, as they called it. If they don't meet sales goals or other predetermined budgetary numbers, they may consider unethical practices to try to make those numbers. In extreme cases, this can lead to a breakdown in corporate ethics, such as with WorldCom and Enron, where management was obsessed with meeting budget expectations and earnings forecasts, to the point that they use fraudulent means to accomplish those goals, sometimes called earnings management. Besides the potential ethical dilemmas that can arise from attempting to follow a budget too strictly, there are other issues to consider. Rigid adherence to annual fixed plans and budgets can even stifle innovation and hinder corporate response to competition and change. Hope and Fraser used the example of the 1980s and 1990s, where many foreign manufacturers entered into domestic markets, particularly in the US. Firms that were too focused on reaching budgetary goals may not have been thinking about what customers wanted at that time, thereby losing more in the process. Second point is that traditional budgets may discourage frontline employees from taking responsibility for their performance. People are less likely to buy into something that they didn't have a say in, which is usually the case with budgets set by upper management. Budgets, especially long-term ones, can quickly become obsolete with changes in the marketplace or due to internal changes within the business. For example, in my own company, we had forecasted that we would complete a large loan sale at the beginning of the year, or in the first quarters particularly. The sale didn't go through, and when it didn't go through, it felt like we were just trying to catch up to our budgeted figures for the remainder of the year. Not very fun. But not all hope is lost. Companies can make changes to overcome these problems. The first thing that companies can do to change is to not let their budgets tell them what to do. It's not your budget's not your mom. Hope and Fraser tell how some companies no longer allow budgets to determine how resources are allocated, or what business units make and sell, or how the performance of those units and their people will be evaluated and rewarded. They don't let their budgets determine those things. Another thing is that companies can empower their frontline employees, particularly according to Hope and Fraser. In an empowered organization, people are free to make mistakes and equally free to fix them. I think that's a great sentiment. And another key point is to tie incentives more to key performance indicators instead of financial goals, or some combination of those two things, perhaps. These may be much more relevant to frontline employees, as there are factors that are much more within their control. I'll discuss these ideas a little bit more as we look at an example of a business that has successfully implemented some of these changes. Svenska Handelsbanken, hopefully I pronounced that closely enough, a Swedish bank, abandoned traditional budgeting in the early 1970s and has been thriving ever since. It underwent a drastic decentralization and now has a hierarchy consisting of branch managers, regional managers, and the CEO. There's just 3 levels essentially. This means that employees, particularly branch managers, are much more empowered to make decisions. They determine staffing levels and are at the forefront of setting goals for their own branch or region. Employees know how their region is performing in relation to the others in the bank, and there is even a healthy dose of friendly competition amongst them, as they mentioned in the article. Handelsbanken's chairman cited a major difference in how they work in comparison to other banks. He said, "Problems are transparent. They are not hidden within the nooks and crannies of management layers and allowed to fester." That's a great example of how a company can still run efficiently, and perhaps even more so when it is not tied down to traditional budgeting practices. In conclusion, although it may not be realistic to think that the current practices of budgeting will ever completely go away, organizations can still learn how to make it more effective and perhaps focus their efforts on other measures that will be better metrics on which to base employees' incentives. I personally may not agree 100% with this article, or that budgets need to be abolished per se, but Hope and Fraser do make some really great points in as to how a company can run more efficiently and incentivize its employees more effectively. And so this is a great read. It had some really good points and some things that definitely any company could take away from.